The alert hit Savinketh's personal terminal at 3:17, flagged urgent by the Bureau's automated triage system, which was almost certainly a mistake. Savinketh was Deputy Superintendent of Resource Allocation for the Compact's Outer Rim Provisioning Directorate, and he had been in this role for 11 years. He understood the triage system's failure modes. It flagged urgent on anything submitted with a risk tier annotation above 4, and junior analysts, particularly human exchange placements, routinely annotated everything above a 4 because they did not yet understand that the tier system was calibrated against historical volatility bands, not against whatever model they had built in their own time using their own methodology. He opened the submission anyway, because the alternative was lying awake. The analyst's name was Kira Voss, 22 years old, exchange placement from one of the human economic colleges, assigned to the Bureau's data reconciliation unit 8 weeks ago. Her job was to cross-check monthly provisioning intake figures against the Bureau's forecast models and flag discrepancies exceeding 5% for senior review. It was careful, important, low-status work. She was very good at it. What she had submitted at 3:12 was not a discrepancy flag. It was a 40-page document titled Locked Cascade: Why the Q3 Outer Rim Provisioning Shortfall cannot be averted by any intervention available to this Bureau within the current planning window. Savinketh read the title 3 times. Then he read it a 4th time. Then he started reading the document. Kira Voss had not built a new model. That was the first thing he noticed, and it made him slow down. Junior analysts who built their own models were easy to dismiss. The models were invariably miscalibrated against the Bureau's validated frameworks, the methodology unrecognized, the output's noise dressed up as signal. Kira Voss had used the Bureau's own model. The Compact Outer Rim Provisioning Index, version 9.4, the same validated framework the Bureau had been running for 6 years. She had simply run it with different inputs. Not invented inputs. Actual inputs that the Bureau's standard run did not include, because the Bureau's standard run relied on intake figures submitted by the provisioning contractors, and the provisioning contractors submitted their figures on a quarterly lag. Kira Voss had not used the quarterly figures. She had used the daily shipment manifest records, which were filed in real time, which the Bureau's reconciliation unit had access to as part of its discrepancy checking function, and which, she had apparently noticed 3 weeks ago, told a systematically different story from the quarterly figures. The quarterly figures said that outer rim provisioning was running at 92% of target. The daily manifest said it was running at 74% of target. The gap had been widening since the first week of the quarter. The contractors were not behind on paperwork. They were behind on delivery, filing optimistic projections while the actual shipment volume declined, and the Bureau's model, which took the contractors at their word, had been forecasting accordingly. Savinketh turned to the Cascade section. Kira Voss had built the Cascade analysis directly from the Bureau's own contingency modeling framework, the one that lived in the appendix to the annual risk report and was updated every 3 years, and in the 11 years Savinketh had worked here, had never once been used in an active situation. It asked a single question: given a provisioning shortfall of X% at T-N weeks, what intervention options remain viable? The framework listed them, in descending order of lead time requirement. At a 74% delivery rate, the Bureau had missed the window for contractor renegotiation by 6 weeks. It had missed the window for emergency secondary source activation 4 weeks ago. The emergency stockpile release option had a 30-day logistics lead time. 30 days from now was 11 days past the Q3 close. The only option still nominally within the window was accelerated direct procurement, which required approval from 3 senior compact offices and had never been executed faster than 42 days. She had noted at the bottom of the cascade table that 42 days was also 11 days past the Q3 close. Savenketh set down the document. He picked it up again. He was Velsath, geometric, crystalline in bone structure, his facets refracting the flat institutional glow of his home office at the edges where his angles were sharpest. His species processed information in parallel channels, which was useful in his role, and occasionally a problem when several channels returned contradictory assessments simultaneously. That was happening now. One channel said the analysis was wrong. One said it was incomplete. One said the methodology was unauthorized. One said the math was correct. One said the math was very correct. One said he needed to call someone. He turned back to page 1 and read it again from the beginning, more slowly this time, looking for the error. He read past the methodology section, past the data sourcing section, past the reconciliation variance appendix. He found no error. He found, on page 31, a sensitivity analysis in which she had deliberately constructed scenarios favorable to the quarterly figures, assuming the manifests overstated the shortfall by 10%, by 15%, by 20%, and showed that, even under the most generous assumption available, the Bureau had still missed the contractor renegotiation window and was within days of losing the secondary source option as well. She had tried to make her own finding go away. It had not gone away. He called Superintendent Arath Valen at 3:41. Arath Valen answered on the fourth tone, which was faster than Savenketh expected, which told him Arath Valen had also been awake. "The exchange analyst submission," Savenketh said. "I saw it," Arath Valen said. "Who authorized her access to the daily manifest records?" "She has standing access. Reconciliation unit function. The access was granted at intake." There was a pause. "She used our own framework. Version 9.4, with the daily manifests as input instead of the quarterly contractor figures." Another pause, longer. "The contractors are going to say the quarterly figures are the authoritative submission." "They are the authoritative submission under our standard protocol," Savenketh said. "The daily manifests are filed under a separate regulatory instrument. She didn't replace the authority figures. She cross-referenced them." "That's not how we run the model." "No, but the model doesn't prohibit it." She checked. "There's a footnote in the methodology document, page 47. The model accepts either input class." The silence on the other end had a particular texture. Savenketh had worked with Arath Valen for 9 years, and he knew the difference between the silence of thinking and the silence of realizing. This was the second kind. "What does she want us to do?" Arath Valen asked. "She doesn't suggest a solution," Savenketh said. "Her document explicitly says there isn't one within the Bureau's authority in the time remaining. She's recommending we escalate to the Compact Provisioning Council immediately, tonight, with the full manifest dataset and the cascade analysis, and request emergency authority transfer. Tonight." Her recommendation. "The Council has a 48-hour convening requirement. If we file the escalation request before 600, we can have an emergency session within 2 days. If we wait for the standard review cycle, the session date falls after the intervention window closes entirely." Arath Valen said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had the flat, careful quality of someone who was being precise. "The contractors will dispute her numbers. They'll say the daily manifests are pre-reconciliation figures, subject to revision. They'll say the shortfall she's identified is within reconciliation variance." Savenketh had already looked at that question. She addresses it on pages 22 through 27. The manifests from the first 4 weeks of the quarter have already been reconciled and closed. The shortfall appears in both the pre- and post-reconciliation figures. The variance between them is under 2%. The 18% gap between the quarterly projections and the actual delivery totals is not reconciliation variance. Another silence. How did she find this? Areth Valen asked. Not a challenge, a genuine question. She was reconciling the queue too close, Savenketh said. She noticed the daily manifest totals weren't matching the contractor summaries. She assumed it was a data entry error. When it persisted into Q3, she started tracking it. She's been tracking it for 3 weeks. She submitted when the cascade window closed on the last viable intervention option. 3 weeks. She appears to have been waiting to be certain before she said anything. That landed differently than he expected. He heard Areth Valen breathe out. Get her on a call, Areth Valen said. Now, I want to hear her answer the methodology questions before I decide whether to escalate. Kira Voss answered her call at 3:58, wide awake, which suggested she had been awake since she filed the document. She looked exactly as Savenketh's personnel file described her. Young, dark-haired, sitting at a very tidy workstation surrounded by printouts, wearing the muted gray of the Bureau's exchange placement uniform. She did not look alarmed by the fact that the superintendent of her directorate had joined a call at 4 in the morning. She looked like someone who had been expecting it. Areth Valen wasted no time on pleasantries. He went through the methodology questions one by one, the manifest data class, the model input substitution, the reconciliation variance, the cascade timeline calculations. Each question was direct, and each answer was direct, and the answers were already in the document, which they all knew, but Savenketh understood why Areth Valen was asking them again. He was watching her. She answered without notes, without hesitation. When Areth Valen raised the contractor reconciliation argument, she cited page 24 and the specific reconciliation instrument number without looking it up. When he pressed her on the sensitivity analysis, had she considered that the manifests might themselves be subject to systematic underreporting? She said yes, she had, and she had modeled it. She pulled up a supplemental table she had not included in the main document because she had not wanted to make the document longer than necessary to establish the core finding. The supplemental table showed that manifest underreporting would need to exceed 31% to move the cascade timeline out of the critical window. Historical manifest accuracy across the Bureau's 17 provisioning corridors averaged within 4%. Areth Valen looked at the table without speaking. Areth Valen asked her, near the end of the call, why she had waited 3 weeks instead of submitting earlier. She said she had wanted to be wrong. She had spent the 3 weeks looking for the error in her approach, because she understood that the quarterly contractor figures were the authoritative input, and that the standard model had been running without flags, and that it was far more likely she was missing something than that the Bureau's entire forecasting process had a blind spot for 3.5 years. She had found the methodology footnote on page 47 in the 2nd week. She had run the cascade analysis in the 3rd week, hoping it would show she was outside the critical window on all scenarios. It had not. She had submitted when the last option closed. Areth Valen ended the call and did not speak for approximately 30 seconds. The contractors are going to be furious, he said. Yes, Savenketh said. The council is going to want to know why this sat in the daily manifests for 1.5 quarters without the Bureau catching it. Yes. The answer is that we never cross-referenced the 2 datasets because we trusted the contractor reporting, and the daily manifests were treated as a pre-reconciliation working file. Yes. And she found it because her job was to reconcile discrepancies, and she reconciled the discrepancy. Yes, Savenketh said. He had been turning this over since 3/17. The Bureau had the manifest data. The Bureau had the model. The Bureau had a reconciliation unit whose function was explicitly to cross-reference figures and flag gaps. Every piece Kira Voss had used to build her analysis was a piece the Bureau already owned. She had not found information the Bureau lacked. She had assembled information the Bureau had never thought to assemble, because the protocol said to use the contractor quarterly figures, and the protocol had not been questioned in 6 years. She had questioned it when the reconciliation numbers did not match. File the escalation request, HFY said. Use her cascade analysis as the supporting document. I'll want her present when the council convenes. I'll notify her. Do it now, she should know before she sleeps. A pause if she's sleeping. Savenketh sent the notification at 4:23. He included a formal acknowledgement of her submission, the escalation filing confirmation, and a note that her participation would be required at the council session. He phrased it in bureau language, which was the only language the system allowed. He then added at the bottom, outside the standard template fields, a single sentence that was not bureau language at all. It said, "Your methodology was sound. Thank you for checking until you were certain." He held the cursor over the send command for a moment, then he sent it. Outside his window, the station's maintenance cycle was running, the corridor lights still on their overnight setting, the shift change still 2 hours away. Kira Voss's alert icon showed she had read the message within 90 seconds. She sent no reply, which was the correct professional response to a message from a deputy superintendent. Savenketh looked at her document again, 40 pages. Built from the Bureau's own tools, the Bureau's own data, a methodology footnote on page 47 of a framework document that had sat in the Bureau's system for 6 years. 3 weeks of checking it quietly before saying a word, and then submitting it at 3:12 in the morning because that was when the window had finally closed, and there was no longer any point in waiting. He had read thousands of submitted analyses in 11 years. He could not recall one that had included a section explicitly trying to disprove its own central finding. He closed the document and opened the escalation filing interface. The request went to the council at 4:31 within the 600 window. He copied HFY and attached the full 40 pages, the supplemental table, and the complete daily manifest dataset going back to the first week of Q2. He marked the filing critical. He had never marked a filing critical before. He did not sleep before the shift change. He sat at his desk and worked through the contractor contact list and the council briefing outline, preparing the case that the Bureau would have to make for why it had not caught this itself. He drafted 3 versions of the opening paragraph and deleted 2 of them for being too careful, too cushioned against the plain fact. The honest answer, he had decided by 500, was also the only defensible one. They had not looked. She had,